Hey everyone. Tonight, I have a collection of creepy stories to tell you. So before we get started, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel so I can keep making better videos. Now lie back and relax as we begin this journey together tonight. The knock came just after the final chime of the grandfather clock. It was soft, at first tentative, like a hesitant breath against my wooden door. I froze in the hallway, every muscle poised to flee or fight. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, a shuddering echo of that single, dreadful rap. The house was silent, but for my racing pulse and the whisper of the old floorboards under my bare feet. I could taste cold metal in my mouth, and each breath felt jagged, as though the night itself were slicing at my lungs. I crept toward the door, drawn by a mixture of dread and stubborn curiosity. The hallway light flickered, bathing the peeling wallpaper in erratic bursts of pale yellow. Shadows danced grotesquely, stretching and contracting like living things. I paused at the edge of its lantern glow, recalling the strange dreams that had haunted me all week. Dreams of a face pale and unreadable, framed in darkness. I shook my head, attempting to banish the memory. But the knock came again, slower, now deliberate and knowing. My hand hovered above the tarnished brass knob. It was warm, unnaturally so. I closed my eyes and pressed my palm to the cold wood, feeling its grain warp under my skin. The air grew thick, oppressive, smelling of damp earth and something faintly sweet, like rotting lilacs, an undertone of decay that set my teeth on edge. Another knock, 3 slow beats. I recognized the pattern. My pulse hammered in response. Recognition brought no relief. It felt personal, targeted. Someone or something was there for me. I swallowed hard and turned the knob. The door swung inward with a groan that carried down the dark corridor like a mournful plea. There was no one on the threshold, just a perpetual gloom pressing against the inner frame. My breath caught as I stepped outside, lantern in hand, the hallway light surrendering to shadow. The air was unnaturally still. No moonlight filtered through the narrow window beside the door. Only darkness, thick and impenetrable. As I stood frozen, I noticed something wedged into the gap between the door and the frame. A small, bloodless handprint pressed in chalky white. My lantern trembled in my grasp, casting a revolving halo of light that revealed nothing else. No footprints, no other marks, just that stark print. My heart skipped. Chalk dust flaked under my fingertip as I touched it, cold and brittle. Memory stirred of childhood chalk drawings, innocent, until the lines blurred into something grotesque. The house sighed behind me. Floorboards creaked as though someone had just stepped away. I spun, eyes wide, but the corridor was empty. I felt watched. The hair on my neck rose in a line of fire. I turned back to the threshold and noticed wet footprints on the doorstep, small, too small to belong to any living human. They disappeared into the gloom of the yard, something masked in shadow. I grabbed my coat, every instinct screaming to flee, yet my feet moved toward the stairs. Candle sconces lined the wall, each flame flickering as if breathing. I lit a candle and held it before me. Its warm glow kept the shadows at bay by a fingertip's distance. The air smelled of old wax and smoke. Each step down the narrow stairwell echoed. My candlelight danced over cracked plaster and gouged steps. The hush was suffocating, every echo magnified in my chest. At the bottom, I reached for the lantern, its glass trembling like an eyeball. I hurried into the living room where the fire had gone out. Embers lay cold in the hearth. The mantel clock stood silent at 12:03. I put the lantern on the coffee table. The knock sounded again. It reverberated through the walls, a drumming heartbeat in the bones of the house. I spun toward the front window. Silhouetted behind the glass, I thought I saw a figure hunched and still. But when I darted the lantern's beam, there was nothing, only the gnarled limbs of the old oak tree scratching against the siding. Something skittered past the window. A shadow that shouldn't move. I swallowed. Silence returned, then scratch. A fingernail against the glass. Slow, deliberate. My skin crawled. I approached the window, breath catching. Outside, the world was black. No street lamps, no stars, only an inky void. My reflection stared back, wide eyes, pallid skin hair mussed with fear. And behind me, a flicker, my candle's dancing flame revealing the dark hallway empty as before. The knock came one final time, a single muted tap that rattled my bones. I felt the floor vibrate beneath my feet. Then it stopped. The silence was more terrifying. I strained to hear the slightest movement, wind creaking wood, but nothing. The house seemed to hold its breath with me. I edged back toward the front door, lantern held high. My shadow stretched tall and spindly beside me, merging with the darkness beyond the threshold. I reached the door, my fingertips brushing the cold wood once more. The chalky handprint was smudged as though someone had recast it. The lines blurred, transforming into something like a jagged grin. Panic surged. I twisted the knob and yanked the door open. The night air rushed in cold and wet, tugging at my hair and clothes. The yard lay empty under a starless sky. Only the old oak stood sentinel, its twisted limbs beckoning. I closed the door, quickly bolting it with trembling hands. The hallway light flickered back on, casting the wallpaper in a garish glow. My heart pounded so loud, I thought the walls would crack. I sank to the floor, back against the door lantern beside me, candle guttering. The house exhaled. The shadows retreated, but the dread did not. I pressed my forehead to the door, listening. Silence. Then faintly from somewhere deep inside those walls, I heard it, a soft scrape. Something moving. Beneath the floorboards. Somewhere close. I pounded a fist against the door. "Stay out!" I whispered, voice hoarse. No reply. Only that distant scrape. My lantern flickered. Outside, the wind ceased. The world paused. I realized then I had invited something in, and now it was already here. The knock came just after the final chime of the grandfather clock. It was soft, at first tentative, like a hesitant breath against my wooden door. I froze in the hallway, every muscle poised to flee or fight. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, a shuddering echo of that single dreadful rap. The house was silent, but for my racing pulse and the whisper of the old floorboards under my bare feet. I could taste cold metal in my mouth, and each breath felt jagged, as though the night itself were slicing at my lungs. I crept toward the door, drawn by a mixture of dread and stubborn curiosity. The hallway light flickered, bathing the peeling wallpaper in erratic bursts of pale yellow. Shadows danced grotesquely stretching and contracting like living things. I paused at the edge of its lantern glow, recalling the strange dreams that had haunted me all week. Dreams of a face pale and unreadable framed in darkness. I shook my head, attempting to banish the memory, but the knock came again, slower now, deliberate and knowing. My hand hovered above the tarnished brass knob. It was warm, unnaturally so. I closed my eyes and pressed my palm to the cold wood, feeling its grain warp under my skin. The air grew thick, oppressive smelling of damp earth and something faintly sweet like rotting lilacs. An undertone of decay that set my teeth on edge. Another knock, 3 slow beats. I recognized the pattern. My pulse hammered in response. Recognition brought no relief. It felt personal, targeted. Someone or something was there for me. I swallowed hard and turned the knob. The door swung inward with a groan that carried down the dark corridor like a mournful plea. There was no one on the threshold, just a perpetual gloom pressing against the inner frame. My breath caught as I stepped outside, lantern in hand, the hallway light surrendering to shadow. The air was unnaturally still. No moonlight filtered through the narrow window beside the door. Only darkness thick and impenetrable. As I stood frozen, I noticed something wedged into the gap between the door and the frame, a small, bloodless handprint pressed in chalky white. My lantern trembled in my grasp, casting a revolving halo of light that revealed nothing else. No footprints, no other marks, just that stark print. My heart skipped. Chalk dust flaked under my fingertip as I touched it, cold and brittle. Memory stirred of childhood chalk drawings, innocent until the lines blurred into something grotesque. The house sighed behind me. Floorboards creaked as though someone had just stepped away. I spun, eyes wide, but the corridor was empty. I felt watched. The hair on my neck rose in a line of fire. I turned back to the threshold and noticed wet footprints on the doorstep, small, too small to belong to any living human. They disappeared into the gloom of the yard. Something masked in shadow. I grabbed my coat, every instinct screaming to flee, yet my feet moved toward the stairs. Candle sconces lined the wall, each flame flickering as if breathing. I lit a candle and held it before me. Its warm glow kept the shadows at bay by a fingertip's distance. The air smelled of old wax and smoke. Each step down the narrow stairwell echoed. My candlelight danced over cracked plaster and gouged steps. The hush was suffocating, every echo magnified in my chest. At the bottom, I reached for the lantern, its glass trembling like an eyeball. I hurried into the living room where the fire had gone out. Embers lay cold in the hearth. The mantel clock stood silent at 12:03. I set the lantern on the coffee table. The knock sounded again. It reverberated through the walls, a drumming heartbeat in the bones of the house. I spun toward the front window. Silhouetted behind the glass, I thought I saw a figure hunched and still. But when I darted the lantern's beam, there was nothing, only the gnarled limbs of the old oak tree scratching against the siding. Something skittered past the window, a shadow that shouldn't move. I swallowed. Silence returned, then scratch. A fingernail against the glass. Slow, deliberate. My skin crawled. I approached the window, breath catching. Outside, the world was black. No street lamps, no stars. only an inky void. My reflection stared back, wide eyes, pallid skin, hair mussed with fear, and behind me, a flicker. My candle's dancing flame, revealing the dark hallway empty as before. The knock came one final time, a single muted tap that rattled my bones. I felt the floor vibrate beneath my feet, then it stopped. The silence was more terrifying. I strained to hear the slightest movement, wind creaking wood, but nothing. The house seemed to hold its breath with me. I edged back toward the front door, lantern held high. My shadow stretched tall and spindly beside me, merging with the darkness beyond the threshold. I reached the door, my fingertips brushing the cold wood once more. The chalky handprint was smudged as though someone had recast it. The lines blurred, transforming into something like a jagged grin. Panic surged. I twisted the knob and yanked the door open. The night air rushed in cold and wet, tugging at my hair and clothes. The yard lay empty under a starless sky. Only the old oak stood sentinel, its twisted limbs beckoning. I closed the door quickly, bolting it with trembling hands. The hallway light flickered back on, casting the wallpaper in a garish glow. My heart pounded so loud I thought the walls would crack. I sank to the floor, back against the door lantern beside me, candle guttering. The house exhaled. The shadows retreated, but the dread did not. I pressed my forehead to the door, listening. Silence. Then faintly, from somewhere deep inside those walls, I heard it, a soft scrape. Something moving beneath the floorboards, somewhere close. I pounded a fist against the door. "Stay out," I whispered, voice hoarse. No reply. Only that distant scrape. My lantern flickered. Outside, the wind ceased. The world paused. I realized then I had invited something in, and now it was already here. The closet door creaked open, slow, deliberate, as though the house itself yielded to its will. I pressed my back against the far wall, clutching my knees, breath trapped between hope and terror. A sliver of moonlight sliced through the gap, illuminating a pale hand that reached in first. The glove had returned as though sewn from the inky darkness itself. It rested on the floor beside me, beckoning with chalk-dusted fingertips. I forced myself to look at it. The glove's surface shimmered with faint silvery rune symbols I had never seen but recognized from the margins of my scrawled journals. Recurring motifs, the oak's gnarled limbs, the broken clock face, that chalk handprint. My pulse slammed against my ribs. This was not random. It was precise, an invitation and a warning all at once. A voice echoed in the cramped space, softer than breath, yet louder than my pounding heart. "Come!" It was the same whisper, but now urgent. It dragged at me, tugging me from the closet's dark embrace. I rose on trembling legs, candle-snuffed candlelight gone. Only the moon and the faint glow of runes on the glove to guide me. The scribbled word, "coming," flickered in my mind, looping like a broken record. I stepped out into the study. The door slammed shut behind me, though I had not touched it. The room lay transformed. The lamp flickered on its own, casting the shelves into sharp relief. The photograph lay on my desk, face up, the figure's eyes following me. The pages I had written fluttered in a sudden draft, my words alive again, curling into the air like smoke. "Finish," the voice commanded, echoing from every corner. I realized then that the visitor was not bound by flesh or bone. It was my own story, My unfinished tale trapped in chalk and ink, and it had come to claim its ending. My trembling fingers found a pen on the desk. I sank onto the chair paper before me. I looked into the silvery glow of the glove's runes and felt them pulse in time with my heart. I wrote without thinking, words spilling, "The oak stands outside guardian and jailer." The pen scratched across the page. The lamp flame wavered. In the reflection of the window, I saw the visitor's shape looming behind me, tall, slender, with hollow eyes that gleamed like stars lost in an endless night. I ignored the urge to turn and kept writing. At midnight, the final chime calls him home. The grandfather clock in the hallway began its slow cadence, 12 strokes hollower than before. Each chime resonated through my chest. At the final chime, the study door burst open. Moonlight flooded the room, revealing the figure in full, a gaunt silhouette draped in tattered coat and scarf that fluttered though there was no wind. Its face was blank porcelain chalk lines tracing a grin. The handprint on my door reappeared on its chest, the same chalky white. Fear seared through me, but I kept writing. He walks the halls until his tale is told. The figure took a step forward, and the runes on the glove glowed brighter. The smell of damp earth and rotting lilacs thickened the air. I felt roots coil around my ankles, echoing the oak's limbs outside. I wrote, "He seeks the author who abandoned him." A low metallic laugh filled the room. The visitor pointed at the paper. I realized I had strayed. I was writing my words, not its story. The glow dimmed, and the figure advanced. I shuddered, mind racing. Desperate, I crossed out my last sentence and began anew. I am the author. I will finish this. The runes flickered back to life. The visitor halted. Lightning flashed through the window, illuminating the chalk symbols that now scrawled themselves across the walls, ENDING. They crawled like vines weaving through the room. My hand shook, but I forced the pen. I will tell your story. Each word convulsed on the page. The visitor's grin grew wider, chalk lines cracking like old paint. I wrote the final line. On this night, I bind you to your ending. The pen dropped from my hand. Silence fell heavy. The writing on the walls pulsed once, then shattered like glass. The visitor stepped forward, face inches from mine. I looked into those hollow eyes, expecting terror, but found relief instead. It reached out fingertips, brushing my cheek. Cold, but gentle. You remembered, it whispered. The glove vanished, its runes dissolving into stardust. The figure's form wavered, shifting into nothingness. The oak's branches scraped once against the window, and then all was still. Candlelight returned. The lamp steadied. My study was empty, save for the penned pages and my ragged breath. I sank to the floor, chest heaving. The grandfather clock chimed one final time, echoing through the silent house. 12:30. The chalk handprint on the desk had faded to dust. I picked up the photograph and found the figure gone from the window. The world outside was calm. No wind, no shadows. Just the moon's pale gaze. I gathered the pages of my story and slid them into my notebook. Outside, the old oak stood motionless against the night sky. Its twisted limbs no longer scratched the glass. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of lilacs. I closed my eyes and let the night wash over me. I understood. Then stories are alive. They hunger for completion, for the final binding of words. If neglected, they will find a way to finish themselves. I shut the door and locked it, heart still ringing with distant echoes. Inside, the house sighed and settled. In the silence, I felt a presence I could no longer see, but knew lingered in every corner. I returned to my desk and lit a candle. The pages lay waiting. My pen hovered ready. The visitor had departed, but its story remained. It would live on the page, haunting every reader's dream. And if ever I neglected another tale, I would remember midnight visitors knock until their story is told. I slipped the old brass key into the lock and felt the familiar click echo down the silent hallway. The door creaked on its hinges, sounding more like a sigh than a hinge, as if resisting my return. I hesitated at the threshold, nostrils flaring against the stale odor of dust and aged wood. My childhood room lay before me in half shadow, the faded wallpaper peeling at the edges. And I felt it before I saw it, a cold presence gathering in the corner near the window. The single bulb overhead flickered, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. One moment it glowed a weak yellow, the next it winked out entirely, and I was left staring into pitch black. I held my breath. A whisper scritched against the floorboards just beyond my bed, skimming across the threadbare carpet. I strained to catch a word, any syllable, but only caught the metallic snap of my own heartbeat. My skin prickled. The door swung shut behind me without a hand guiding it. I stepped further inside, shaking off the memory of my old bedposts and childhood posters. Each object felt uncanny, reframed by empty years and the specter that now shared the room. The faded plush bear I once cuddled lay limply on the floor, its button eyes staring into marrow. I reached down, fingertips grazing the coarse fur, and a whisper tickled my ear. It teased my name. My blood turned ice. I drew in a slow breath, tasting the lingering hint of mildew and something else. Something faintly sweet, like rotting petals. I could almost see the dust motes drifting in the erratic beam of my flashlight as I clicked it on. The beam cut through darkness to reveal shifting shapes, shadows that recoiled from my light, then stretched long and lanky when I blinked. The ceiling fan groaned as I raised the light, its blade sweeping slow arcs overhead, scraping the stale air. I advanced toward my old desk, where I once scrawled stories and dreams now splintered and scarred. The diary I kept as a child sat on its corner, untouched, its leather cover cracked. It called to me, but I resisted. I felt eyes on me from the far corner, those two lumps of shadow. The air shook with a low hum vibrating through my chest. I could almost swear I heard soft lamentations as though someone wept somewhere beyond the walls. The bedroom door rattled. I froze mid-step, flashlight beam locked on the closet door. The rattling came again, a trembling clap against wood. My throat tightened. I forced my muscles to move. I walked to the closet and yanked it open. Empty. Only rows of faded shirts and mothballs that smelled of dust and denial. Behind the clothes, the wall remained bare. Yet I felt the presence recoil, as if I'd disturbed its hiding place. I closed the door and leaned against the frame, heart thrashing. The bulb pulsed again. Then it held steady. The momentary calm tightened the tension, dragged it taut. I heard something tap, tap, tap against the window glass. I jerked around. The beam landed on the pane to catch a slow drip of condensation, but the tapping turned to a brittle scratch like a fingernail scraping. My blood went cold. Whoever, or whatever, was outside turned its attention inward. I bolted across the floor, hands outstretched, and grabbed the diary. It felt unnaturally heavy in my palm, as if resisting removal. The cover trembled under my fingers. I tore it open. Pages lay blank, but for the scrawled entries I wrote when I was 12. My handwriting looked childish and innocent, but something flickered behind the ink, a darker undertone I didn't recall. Yet as I touched the page, I heard the whisper clearly, "Remember." I swallowed hard. The light flickered again, then steadied. I blinked to steady my vision. The corner where I felt the presence now lay empty in the flashlight's glow. But I sensed movement just beyond the edges of illumination. I traced it back to the corner near the window. There, the heavy drapes stirred, though no breeze blew through the closed sash. The latch looked undisturbed, and yet the fabric rustled like wings unfurling. I forced myself to take a step closer, every nerve screaming to flee. I reached out and touched the curtain. The moment my fingertips brushed the woven thread, a shiver exploded through me. The world around me dimmed. My heartbeat thundered so loud I could barely hear the scratch of paper in my hand. And then the whisper came again, distinct, urgent, almost desperate. It circled my ear. "Help me." I yanked my hand away, nearly dropping the diary. The light wavered, and I saw its movement reflected in the window. The shadow of a crouched figure on the other side, just out of reach. I held my breath while my body trembled. The figure shifted, melting back into shadow. I felt its gaze still upon me, though nothing more than darkness confronted me. I spun and raced toward the room's sole chair, dragging it behind me. I pushed it against the door, bracing it carefully. My palms left dark prints on the wood. Behind me, the desk lamp flickered in answer to the overhead bulb. Then both bulbs dimmed, leaving me in near total darkness, enveloped by the presence pressing in. I flicked the diary open to the table of contents, looking for anything I recognized. My eyes stung as I tried to make sense of the old cursive. My breath came in tight pants. Sweat beaded on my forehead, mingling with cold dread. I forced myself to read June 14th. She was always here. The entry cut off mid-sentence. My heart clenched. June 14th, today. I flipped further, scanning page after page. The entries grew more frantic and disjointed as they progressed. My hands shook. I realized that the figure in the window wasn't some random ghost. It was something tethered to this room, something born of my own history. I heard the floorboards groan behind me. I spared a glance. Nothing but my own shadow elongated by the flashlight. The whisper now sounded like voices, dozens of them, uneasy murmurs echoing from every corner. The walls themselves seemed to throb with contained energy. The diary slipped from my grasp and hit the floor with a dull thud. In the silence that followed, I felt the presence envelop me, filling every squeezed breath with raw, aching sorrow. I realized I couldn't ignore what waited here any longer. The house still held my memories, good and bad, but I had no idea how to separate mine from whatever was trapped here. I stared at the closed door, the single chair pinned against it, and made my decision. I gathered the diary, shoved it into my backpack, and flicked the light toward the far corner one last time. The bulb held steady, but I knew the presence was there waiting, watching, and soon it would demand more than my fear. I exhaled and braced myself, stepping deeper into the room, determined to uncover what lay hidden beneath the floorboards, where my story had first entwined with a lost soul's torment. I crouched beside the bed, fingers shaking as I searched for that loose floorboard I remembered prying up long ago, back when the room felt safe and ripe for childhood adventures. My flashlight beam tremored across the hardwood planks until it settled on one slightly raised edges splintered like a half-healed wound. I pressed down, and it resisted creaking with reluctance. Heart hammering, I wedged the diary between my thumb and forefinger and pried the board free. Dust exploded in a soft cloud, stinging my eyes and coating the pages of the diary in pale grit. Beneath the plank lay a shallow cavity carved into the subfloor, and inside it, I could just make out a small, tarnished tin box. The lid was sealed by rusted hinges, and when I pried it open, a metallic scent of decay rose up, mingling with the mustiness of the room. Inside the box lay a handful of faded Polaroids and a yellowed envelope. I slipped my fingers over the fragile paper, which crackled like brittle leaves. The envelope was addressed in a looping script I did not recognize, to the one who remains. No signature. I pulled out the photographs first. The first image showed a little girl in a white dress standing in the very doorway I now occupied, her face obscured by shadow. The second photo captured a swing set frozen in motion, its chains arched as if propelled by invisible hands. The third was a blurred close-up of a hand pressed against glass fingertips splayed wide. My stomach clenched at the recognition I'd taken these pictures as a child, never understanding why they had turned out so unsettling. Now, they felt less like misfires of a toy camera and more like deliberate messages. I flipped the envelope open. Inside lay a single sheet of notebook paper. Edges frayed, scrawled with a letter I couldn't recall ever writing. "I'm sorry I forgot you. I left you behind, and now you're angry. I know your name is Eliza. You followed me into dreams, and now you haunt my waking hours. I cannot feel you until I acknowledge you. I swear I will, before the next moon." Beneath the apology, no signature, just the date, June 5th, 12 years ago. My breath caught. The moon. Tonight. I glanced toward the window. Barely a sliver of light seeped through the closed drapes, yet the world outside brimmed with a pale glow. I swallowed, recalling my childhood fear of the moon's sickly light seeping through cracks and turning my room into a place of trembling shadows. I sat back on my heels and unfolded the diary. I turned to the edge of the page where I'd marked June 5th, skimming the childish handwriting I barely recognized as my own. "Eliza comes when I dream. She calls my name in that soft voice I can't escape. I can't see her face, only her hair long and dark, swirling like smoke. I should be scared, but she's always gentle. She wants me to find her. She says I can help her get home." The line looped into a mess of scribbles. My skin crawled at the thought that my own childish words might have bound her spirit to this room. I realized the small box, the photos, the hidden note all stashed away by me, as though I'd known exactly what I was doing. But why? What had I been trying to accomplish? A soft, Drip, drip, drip sounded from the ceiling fan. I looked up, the noise echoing like a taunt. My flashlight flickered. Then I heard a stifled sob, as though the walls themselves wept. I peered through the murky shadows and saw the drapes stir. The silhouette of that little girl shimmered behind the fabric. My body locked in place. I forced my gaze back to the diary and flipped to the next entry, June 6th. She's closer now. I feel her breath behind me when I write this. I hear her whisper my secrets, things I never told anyone. Sometimes I wonder if she's the one whispering or if it's just me. But the scratching grows louder. She wants me to do something. I can't remember what. The words throbbed on the page like a heartbeat. I traced them with my fingertip, even as a cold hand brushed my shoulder. My breath hitched. I spun around. Nothing but empty air. Yet I felt the weight, as though someone pressed lightly against me and then withdrew. I placed the diary on the floor and knelt beside the cavity. The tin box lay open. I reached inside, lifting a handful of soil-dark clumps, dried flower petals. They crumbled in my palm, releasing a sickly sweet stench. Beneath the petals, something smooth and round a locket. I brushed off grime and opened it with trembling nails. Inside was a miniature portrait of the same girl from the Polaroid. Her face now clear, large, sorrowful eyes staring back at me. I closed the locket and pressed it to my chest. A jolt of electricity shot through me, and the room shuddered. The overhead bulb flickered violently, casting strobing shadows. The rocking chair in the corner swung of its own accord, creaking with rhythmic insistence. The whispering grew louder, a tapestry of voices overlapping into a single urgent plea. Remember, remember. My mind raced. I recalled fragments, a treehouse, under construction laughter, that turned into screams, a storm that trapped us both, two girls, playing a game of hide and seek. I saw the lost face of Eliza, not as a ghost, but alive and shining with sunlight before the accident that ended her life. The memory surfaced. We'd promised to meet under the full moon by the old oak. I'd been late handing her a tiny tin box I'd promised, and she'd waited too long. The branches arced gale force, and lightning split the sky. When I finally found her, she was gone. Her body lying beneath the roots petals, scattered like fallen memories. I pressed the locket tighter. The room plunged into darkness. My flashlight died. I smelled ozone. The air shivered with electricity. Then through the black, her voice emerged, clear, trembling, as though she stood beside me. "You forgot me," she said, each word a pattering drop of rain. I swallowed hard, voice cracking. I'm sorry." A faint glow bloomed around me, soft and bluish, emanating from the locket. The diary's pages fluttered as though caught in a silent wind. The whimpers rose into a keening cry, and I staggered back. The window rattled, curtains billowing, and for a moment I saw her pale form hovering in the center of the glow hair, streaming eyes hollow with longing. I fell to my knees, tears stinging my own eyes. I forgot. I whispered, voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." The glow pulsed. The sobbing subsided into a low hum like the echo of a lullaby. I reached into my backpack and pulled out the envelope. With shaking fingers, I tore it open and recited the half-forgotten vow. "I cannot feel you until I acknowledge you. I swear I will before the next moon." The room stilled. The shadows receded. The glow contracted into the locket, dimming until it rested inert in my palm. And then the voice, soft relieved, whispered one word: home. A wind sighed through the room, raising swirls of dust. The lamp flickered back on. The drapes fell still. The tin box's lid clanked shut. Silence reclaimed the space. I sat on the floor, breath heaving, the diary open in my lap. I realized I had uncovered the truth. Eliza's soul had lingered here because I'd failed her that night when we were children. The diary, the photos, the locket, they were keys to unlocking her sorrow. And though the air still felt heavy, the weight had shifted. I had given her what she needed: acknowledgement. I rose slowly, pressing the locket against my heart. Tomorrow, I would return the tin box beneath the old oak tree and let her rest. But tonight, I would stay and prepare for what must come next. I would gather candles and salt, read the final entries of the diary, and learn the ritual that would free her. I knew the next steps, though. Fear still coiled in my gut. I closed the cavity, returned the floorboard, and packed my tools. As I stood, the room felt different. Less oppressive, more expectant, as though it awaited the final act. The whisper returned once more, gentle now, like a sigh. Thank you. I exhaled, pushing aside terror. The haunting had become a partnership, and together we would finish what I began all those years ago. I gathered my materials by the pale glow of a single desk lamp. White candles perched on tarnished brass holders, a bowl of coarse sea salt, and a length of black ribbon. The diary lay open to its final entry. The ink faint but legible. June 7th. Tonight, I will guide her home. I place these candles in a circle, bind the ribbon with my promise, and whisper her name 3 times. Then she will be free. My hands trembled. Each candle I lit sent a thin wisp of smoke curling toward the ceiling. The room felt colder still, as if Eliza hovered just beyond the ring of salt I'd spread on the floorboards. Outside, wind rattled the window pane, and the moonlight pressed through the gaps in the drapes like pale fingers. I arranged the ribbon in a loose coil at the circle's center and knelt beside it, the diary propped against my knee. I pressed the locket into my palm, its metal cool against my skin. With a breath, I kissed its surface and set it on the ribbon. The moment I did, the candles flared bright, then dimmed to an eerie blue hue. I gasped, swallowing hard as my breath clouded before me in the sudden chill. The overhead bulb winked out, plunging me into near darkness. Only the candles remained, their flames trembling. I closed my eyes. I could feel her there, a presence so close I heard her ragged intake of breath, a soft sob, then silence. The wind died. The floorboards stilled. The world contracted into a pinprick of expectation. I opened the diary and read aloud, voice quavering but firm. By promise made and vow kept true, Eliza's spirit I guide anew. Through salt and flame, I call your name. Cross this world, unchain your pain. The words cracked on my tongue. As I spoke the last line, the room shivered. A soft click sounded beneath me. The closed floorboard shifted, revealing the shallow cavity once more. From the shadows within, pale motes drifted upward, forming the shape of a small girl in a tattered white dress. She hovered above the box's spot toes, brushing the floor, eyes fixed on me with mournful longing. My heart thundered. I swallowed the lump in my throat, then steeled myself and whispered her name, Eliza. The flame nearest me flared. Then all 6 candles burst into bright light, bathing the room in stark clarity. The air buzzed charged with energy. The smell of ozone sharpened my nostrils. Eliza's form solidified, pale and translucent hair floating around her like black smoke. She stared at the locket on the ribbon. I reached inside the circle, mindful not to disturb the salt, and retrieved it. My fingertips brushed against hers as I lifted it. The contact sent a jolt through my arm, a spark that sang in my bones. She flinched, drawing back, and her sob returned, a soft, desperate sound. I held the locket before her and murmured, "This is yours." Her small hand reached out fingers, brushing mine again. The candlelight warped shadows, elongating into crooked shapes on the walls. I felt her sorrow wash over me, heavy as water, and I closed my eyes, sharing her grief without fear. I turned my gaze to the diary's final instruction. Whisper your vow. Release her soul. I drew a deep breath, eyes fixed on the dancing flames, and spoke. I vow to never forget again. I set you free from pain and sin. Go. Now. Find your peace at last. Leave behind what ties you fast. The words echoed into silence. The candles guttered flames, shrinking to pinpoints. The salt circle glowed faintly white for an instant, then dissolved into the floorboards. The air stilled. I gasped, unsure whether to exhale or scream. Eliza remained before me, more solid than before, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She lifted a hand to her heart and then extended it toward me as though offering thanks. I placed my hand over hers, and a warmth spread through me, dispelling the chill. Her features softened, the tension in her shoulders easing. A low hum rose in the room, gentle and distant, like a lullaby carried on wind. The candles flickered out one by one until only a single taper remained, its flame wavering. The hum grew louder, and the walls seemed to pulse with an unseen heartbeat. Then her form dissolved into motes of light that drifted upward toward the ceiling. They coalesced into a swirling sphere of pale radiance and shot out through the closed window, shattering glass as they passed. The sound cracked like thunder, and cool night air rushed in scattering papers across the floor. I fell back onto my heels, eyes wide. The lone candle sputtered and died. Silence returned, except for my ragged breathing and the distant drip of rainwater from the ceiling. The moonlight rushed in, illuminating the room in a soft silver glow. I rose slowly, knees weak, and stepped over the spilled salt. The floorboard lay flush again, but I knew it had served its purpose. I returned the diary to the backpack, slipped the locket into my palm, and felt its warmth fade to room temperature. I padded to the window, wary of shards beneath my feet, and gazed into the night. The rain fell in soft sheets, washing away the last traces of her release. In the distance, the old oak stood silhouetted against the sky. Tomorrow, I would return the tin box beneath its roots as I'd promised. Tonight, I would sleep, if sleep still found me, with one less burden in my chest. I turned back to the room. The faded bear lay undisturbed. The rocking chair sat still. The diary lay closed on the desk, its blank pages promising peace rather than torment. I exhaled the tension I'd carried for years. and felt the hollow ache lift from the corner where she once waited. As I stood in the center of the room, moonlight pooling at my feet, I heard a soft whisper, barely audible, almost lost among the raindrops. "Thank you." I offered a small nod to the empty air. The room felt warmer now, more like the place I had once loved. I picked up the diary and the locket, tucking them into my backpack, and crossed the threshold. The door closed behind me with a gentle click, free of any sigh. Above me, the corridor, lights gleamed steady and bright. I exhaled again, steadying my racing heart. The haunting had ended, but its memory lingered, proof that promises made in childhood could bind or unbind a soul. I walked away from the door, leaving the past behind, knowing that both of us had finally come home. I first noticed the figure just before midnight, when the humming street lamp outside my window flickered into intermittent life. I was lying on my back, tracing the cracks in the ceiling, counting the faint drips of condensation that slipped from the old pipes above. The room felt unnaturally cold, despite the heavy quilt drawn up around my shoulders, and the only sound, other than the slow drip, was the distant roar of highway traffic mixed with the whispering wind. Then, just for an instant, something shifted at the edge of my vision. A tall, thin silhouette pressed against the glass like an oil smear across a pale lantern. At first, I thought it might be a trick of my exhaustion. I'd been pulling long nights at the office, the clatter of keyboard and clinking coffee cups blurring into a restless haze. But sleep had eluded me. My eyelids fluttered as I sat up, heart thrumming in my throat, breaths shallow as I scanned the window pane. There it was. Again, the shape of a person, impossibly still taller than anyone I had ever known. Its head tilted at an odd angle, too far back or forward for comfort. No features were visible, just that unbroken darkness where eyes might be a void that swallowed the thin glow of the street lamp. A creak came from the hallway, as though someone were stepping on a loose floorboard, and I froze. The silhouette vanished. In my chest, dread swelled until it pressed against my ribs like a fist. I dared not blink. The lamp buzzed bright, then dim, its flicker so rapid it felt like an attack on my senses. My pulse echoed in my ears. I swallowed the lump of fear lodged in my throat and rose feet bare against the wooden floor, every nerve alive with warning. The door handle rattled once. Silence followed. No footsteps. Just the ghostly quiver of the lamp and the hush of the wind. I advanced each step, measured, pressing my palm against the cold glass. The street below lay empty, bathed in moonlight and the yellow haze of the lamp. No one walked the pavement. No car lingered at the curb. I traced the shape of trees swaying beyond every rustle magnified. Then I saw it, a single fingerprint-sized smear of condensation pressed from the inside, glistening. It wasn't mine. It trembled as though it had been freshly laid, and a distant memory rose unbidden fingerprints on windows from childhood hide-and-seek games that ended in laughter. But this was different. It felt like a message stenciled in breath and fear. My phone lay on the dresser battery, nearly dead. I reached for it and saw the time, 11:58 p.m. I pressed record on the barely functioning camera, though I knew it might capture nothing but grainy darkness. I leaned close, breath misting the cold pain searching the empty street. Then in that silent moment, the shadow returned. That elongated head, those shoulders curving inward, familiar somehow yet alien. I stumbled back, as if struck, fumbling with the phone. The figure stood motionless, watching or waiting. I raised the phone, and the flash lit the room in a harsh strobe, exposing nothing but my own pale fear reflected back. When the light died, the shadow crouched lower, head-cocked silhouette, bending in a way that no human frame should. A low moan rolled under the floorboards like distant pipes lamenting a loss. I pressed myself against the opposite wall, hands shaking, and tried to swallow the scream rising in my throat. The figure shifted again, retreating to the center of the window. Panic clawed at my chest. I wanted to flee, but my feet were rooted. I wanted to hide, but no place felt safe. The street lamp buzzed its final flicker and went out. Then the window glowed with an unearthly light, like phosphorescent mist caught in glass. The silhouette sharpened tall, and still arms hanging at its sides. I braced against the wall, back against cold plaster, and watched as it raised a hand. Long, slender fingers pressed flat against the glass. A finger glowed like an ember in the mist. My skin prickled, and I felt the world tilt. I couldn't hear my own heartbeat, but I knew it pounded like a war drum. The room contracted, light snuffed by that silent presence. The air turned viscous, each breath a labor. I wanted to believe the figure would vanish in daylight, that this was some hallucination born of stress, but somewhere deep, I knew the truth. I placed my hand against the glass, aligning my palm with the imprint it left behind. The cold seeped through my skin. Goose flesh rippled up my arm, and a wordless dread whispered that I was not alone in my house. I tried to speak, but my voice fractured, lost in the hush. Then, the wind picked up outside, rattling the window frame. It felt like a warning. The shape blurred as though struggling against an unseen current before jerking backward into the shadows beyond the glass. The street lamp blinked back to life in one furious pulse, and the figure was gone. Everything snapped into stale stillness. The distant highway, the trembling lamp, my own shivering form. But I knew it wasn't over. I knew it would return. And neither dawn nor distraction would banish that terrible silhouette from my window. It had tasted curiosity and found me vulnerable. It had etched its presence in the glass and in my mind. Tonight, I realized, was only the beginning. I woke the next morning with the taste of metal in my mouth, as if I'd bitten my tongue in sleep. My room felt impossibly bright sunlight, prying through the curtains like an interrogator's gaze, but an ache in my chest kept me pinned to the edge of the mattress. The smear on the window was gone, washed away by dawn's false promise, yet my fingers still tingled with the phantom chill of that handprint. I reached for a pen and scrawled frantic notes in a leather-bound journal, time-shaped movements. The scrape of paper under my pen sounded unnaturally loud, the only testament to reality I could trust. I spent the day tracing patterns. I dug through old newspapers, online, searching local archives for stories of window apparitions and vanished neighbors. I found whispers of a missing child from nearly 50 years ago, Eliza Harlow, her name fading into yellowed clippings. They said she wandered outside at night, drawn to the glow of street lamps, until she slipped into the woods and never returned. Another account described a silhouette at the window of her bedroom, a shape so familiar her mother thought it was her daughter come home. But Eliza never came back. Only the shadow remained. That evening, I set up my camera on a tripod, pointing it squarely at the window. I lit a single candle on the windowsill, its flame flickering in time with a sudden draft. My heart pounded as I pressed record. Hours dragged by, each minute an eternity of waiting. I reviewed the footage at midnight. For nearly 5 minutes, nothing happened, but the candle quivered and the street lamp buzzed outside. Then at 12:17 a.m., the room went cold again. My breath formed a haze before the lens. I saw the silhouette materialize slowly like oil spreading on water. It didn't appear fully formed until it pressed its palm against the glass. I froze, the frame zooming in. The shape's arm was twisted at an impossible angle elbow, bent backward like a broken hinge. No features, only the outline against the glass. I shivered despite the heater running full blast. When I reached out to wipe away the camera's condensation, my glove touched something sticky. I pulled it back, a smear of blackish residue, like soot mixed with dew. I touched the tip of my finger to the window and recoiled as it glowed faintly, as though the smear were a bruise that pulsed with life. Night after night, I repeated the ritual, and night after night, the figure returned at the same minute, 12:13 a.m. I marked each date in the journal alongside sketches of its pose. Curiously, the shape never moved beyond its spot. It never flicked its wrist or bent its head. It simply stared with that hollow void at the glass. Yet each appearance felt different. One night, its shoulders dropped lower, as if weighed down by something unseen. Another night, its head tilted farther, so that the back of its skull seemed to shift forward, like a knot of darkness in motion. My dreams were invaded by whispers. I heard her voice calling me to the window, soft and urgent, a child's voice pleading to be seen. I woke drenched in sweat, the room inky black, except for phosphorescent streaks across the walls, traces of fugitive light that danced and disappeared. I scribbled nonsense in the margins. She waits. She watches. She beckons. One morning, I awoke to find the room rearranged. My journal lay open on the floor. The spine snapped. The candle overturned wax pooling in slow, inky rivulets. The window was streaked with muddy handprints, but outside the street was spotless, as though the mess belonged to another world. I spoke to my neighbor, Mrs. Armitage, a retired librarian with eyes like shuttered windows. She listened to my story, nodding slowly, then led me to her attic and rummaged through dusty boxes. She produced a tattered scrapbook, newspaper clippings, photographs of a girl in an old-fashioned dress, and letters from a mother begging for her return. The girl's eyes in the photographs were dark and solemn, not childlike, her expression frozen in a perpetual, uncomfortable stare. Mrs. Armitage flipped to a clipping about a seance held in the house decades ago, where attendees claimed to glimpse a form pressing at the window just like mine. She closed the scrapbook with a sigh, saying only the lines between worlds thinned here. Be careful. I spent the next afternoon researching local folklore at the public library. The librarian directed me to a map marking the old Harlow property, now a vacant lot behind our street. I walked there, in the golden haze of late afternoon grass brittle underfoot, and stood before nothing but uneven ground and broken fence posts. A neglected oak tree leaned at a sharp angle, roots clawing the earth like bared fingernails. I placed my palm against its trunk, feeling a heartbeat thrum beneath the bark. Goose flesh rose on my arms. A breeze stirred the branches, sounding almost like laughter. I backed away, breath catching. A faint imprint remained on the tree, the same elongated fingers. Night came, and I felt the house sigh as I passed through the door. I lit 3 candles, one at the window, one beside my journal, one on the oak stump's photograph. I whispered apologies for trespassing on forgotten grief and prayed for mercy. Beneath the candlelight, the oil in the glass flickered the flicker, spelling out shapes I could not trust. I listened to the wind scrape against the window frame. At 12:17 a.m., a gust blew the candles out in perfect unison. Darkness swallowed the room. Something pressed against the glass on the inside. A murmur rattled behind my spine. I felt a breath cold, wet and alive against my neck. I dared not move. The shards of candlelight returned as I fumbled for a match. In the brief glow, I saw the shadow's face pressed to the window. The stark outline of cheekbones, hollow eyes hers, Eliza's face staring back. The glass fogged around her nose. A single tear fell on the pane, welling up in a droplet that glimmered before sliding downward. I wanted to flee, but my limbs refused. I watched the tear track new paths through the condensation, pooling at the base of the glass like a plea for rescue. Then the figure vanished. The candles flickered back to life. Silence closed in like a coffin lid. I felt the edges of reality fray. I couldn't tell if this was vengeance or a cry for help. Was the shadow a predator or a lost child yearning for release? I closed my eyes and tried to remember the comfort of childhood hide-and-seek games, only to recall the cold dread of first realizing I'd been watched. The song of wind through the pipes echoed in my ears, carrying distant laughter that wasn't mine. Over and over I whispered the same question. What do you want? The night stretched before me, endless and waiting. Somewhere beyond the glass, she waited too patient, silent, and unwavering. I felt the weight of her gaze on my back, even as I lay down, staring at the ceiling's cracks. My breath slowed as I drifted toward the edge of sleep, and I knew the answer would come soon. At 12:17 a.m., I would wake once more, and this time I would be ready. When I drifted in and out of sleep that night, each slumber felt like wading through an icy river. The edges of my dreams dissolved into mist, as if the world itself were bleeding into the realm of shadows. I awoke at 12:17 a.m. Exactly, my body jolting upright as though struck by a hidden force. The room was pitch black, but I could see the faint glow of mist forming along the window pane, weaving tendrils of pale light that crawled like living spiders. I swallowed the lump in my throat and reached for the lighter on my nightstand, flicking it open with trembling fingers. The flame cut through the darkness, revealing the figure's outline pressed against the glass. This time the silhouette was different. The shoulders bore the weight of sorrow, the head bowed low as if burdened by decades of grief. A soft, keening wail slipped through the pane, a sound so tinged with anguish that it stabbed at my heart. It wasn't Eliza's childish voice anymore, but something older, more desperate, a plea that resonated in the marrow of my bones. I pressed my palm against the cool surface, aligning my hand with the faint residue of past imprints. The glass felt alive under my palm, pulsing with the rhythm of her lament. I spoke her name into the hush, Eliza. The word trembled on my lips. She drew back slightly, as if acknowledging that I had finally recognized her. The mist brightened, swirling in patterns that suggested movement beyond this world. My chest tightened. I realized I had no idea what would happen if I reached out to her, whether I'd be inviting salvation or doom. My breath hitched, and I dragged a ragged breath through a clenched teeth. Then a single phrase echoed in my mind, clear and deliberate. Free me. It was neither voice nor thought, but a command pressed directly into my consciousness. I stumbled back, heart pounding so fiercely I could hear it in my ears. Free you, I whispered, shaking. The window fogged instantly, obscuring her form, and when it cleared, the wail had sharpened into a scream that reverberated through the walls. The lighter's flame danced and died, plunging me into deeper darkness. I fumbled for the bedside lamp, switching it on in a frantic blur. The room snapped into view, every corner bathed in harsh yellow light. The window, though, seemed untouched by glare. Its surface pulsed with a living glow. Eliza's silhouette appeared again, but this time her hand was raised, knuckles white, against the glass. Behind her, I thought I saw shapes, other forms, shifting in a distant corridor of mist, like lost explorers wandering the void. I needed answers. Grabbing my journal and flashlight, I slipped from the bed and crossed the room in a single stride. My shoes crunched against the worn floorboards as I approached the window. The mist coalesced at the base, forming letters that spelled out a date, 10/31/75. My blood ran cold. That was the night Eliza disappeared. The scratch of pen on paper sounded in my head, and I tore to the desk to jot it down. But when I looked back, the date had changed now. It read, tonight. The glass wept condensation, and a finger dragged a trail through the wet surface, sketching my name. A knock came at the door, soft, deliberate. My skin prickled. I spun around. The hallway lay empty. The door trembled under another knock. The air thickened. I raised the flashlight, its beam quivering as I aimed at the threshold. No one stood there. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, and as I lowered the light, I caught movement in the corner of my eye, a dark shape slipping past the doorway behind me. I wheeled around, nothing but my reflection in the darkened glass door of the closet. I sank to the floor, clutching the journal to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. The knocking resumed, soft, insistent, echoing from every wall. It sounded like fingertips dragging along wood. My teeth chattered. I had no idea if I should answer or hide. My gaze darted to the window. The fog began to swirl, and the silhouette pressed closer, shoulder brushing the glass. In a moment of reckless clarity, I stood and shouted, "What do you want from me?" The words thundered in the silence. The knocking ceased. The mist stilled. Then, as though the house itself exhaled, the window glass cracked. With a spiderweb fracture, lines radiating from the center where Eliza's hand had been. The fracture crawled upward, splitting her form apart. I stumbled backward, mind reeling, as shards glinted like fractured memories. My voice echoed from the crack. Free me. It wasn't Eliza or me, but something strangled between the two. The air shivered with that phrase repeating until the walls seemed to chant it. My heart thundered, adrenaline flooding my veins. In that moment, I understood freeing her meant bridging worlds, tearing down the barrier that kept the dead at bay. I fled the room without thinking, sprinting down the hallway and into the living room where an old mirror hung. I caught sight of myself, eyes wide, face pale, clutching my journal. The reflection shimmered, and behind me in the glass, I saw Eliza's figure stepping through the cracked window. Her face no longer hollowed, but tragically beautiful eyes flooded with tears. A finger reached from the mirror, beckoning. I froze, every instinct screaming to run, but then a gentle warmth pressed against my back, the presence of another. I felt Mrs. Armitage's hand on my shoulder, her voice soft in the dim light. It needs a vessel. My blood ran cold. What are you doing here? I gasped. She held up a tarnished locket on a chain. Inside was a faded photograph of Eliza smiling as a child. This was hers, she said. Give it to her. I turned back to the mirror. The figure wavered as if struggling against some pull. The cracked glass spidered outward still further. Heart hammering, I unclasped the locket and whispered into the mirror, "Take this and find peace." I pressed the locket's image against the glass. The mirror rippled like water. A rush of wind snuffed out the lamps, and for a heartbeat, everything was silent. Then a soft gasp. A child's breath, followed by the faint click of glass resetting itself. Light returned, and the mirror was whole again. The crack vanished. The reflection showed only me trembling, the locket resting cold in my hand. I turned to Mrs. Armitage, her eyes closed, lips moving in a silent prayer. Together, we walked back to Maya's room. The window was dark, and still, the mist gone. No smear, no silhouette. Only the weight of what had passed. I placed the locket on my nightstand and slid into bed, reaching for the quilt that no longer felt oppressive but comforting. My eyelids drifted closed, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I slept without fear. Morning light filtered through the curtains, steady, unwavering. I rose and approached the window. Outside, the street lamp stood silent guard, its glass clear. I touched the pane. It was just glass, nothing more. No echo of sorrow lingered. I glanced at the journal on the desk. The last entry read simply, "She's free." No time, no date, and I believed it. I never imagined the night would come alive so maliciously. The first time I heard that faint scratching, I was already half aware my house was settling. Old beams shift, pipes groan. But this was different. It was deliberate. Beneath my bare feet, just under the maple floorboards of my bedroom, something scuttled. It started as a soft rasp in the hush of midnight. I froze, breath shallow, heart hammering. My skin prickled as though dozens of invisible eyes had turned to watch me. At first, I convinced myself it was rats. We live on the edge of dense woods. Rodents and raccoons are occasional house guests, but these sounds were patient, methodical, a slow, creeping rhythm that whispered promises of dread. 2 nights in a row, I lay rigid in bed, eyelids pried open by the faint but unrelenting clatter beneath me. My phone lay on the nightstand, its screen dead. I wanted light warmth, anything to ward off the darkness that swelled behind my eyes. But even when I flicked the lamp on the floorboards below, the plaster gleamed innocent. Smooth, unbroken timber. No sign of scampering claws, no tunnels or droppings. The third night, it changed. The rasping grew louder. It became a whispering scuff, like fingernails moved with intent. My stomach clenched. I rolled to the edge of the bed, toes grazing the cold floor. Under the doorframe, a thin beam of hallway light stretched across the wood. I leaned forward staring. Then the scratching paused. Silence settled like a curtain. Every breath tasted of iron. Then it resumed, faster, louder, pressing against the barrier between me and something wrong. I clenched my jaw and dropped to my knees. Cold wood pressed into my palms. I pressed my ear against the worst spot. A single loose board, just left of center. Beneath it, I heard a series of delicate taps. 2, 3, 4, followed by a pause. I waited, thoughts spiraling. Memories of late hours, at an empty office, the funny sounds of an old building, the way shadows shifted under my gaze. But never had I felt watched from below. I drew back, footsteps echoing as I stood. My lamp cast quivering shadows across the walls. The air felt thick. I lit a candle and set it on the floor beside the loose board. Tiny flames danced, throwing the boundaries of shadow into sharp relief. My breath steadied. Candlelight coaxed a gentle glow from the edges of the room. I knelt again, heart in my throat. Gently, I pried at the board's nail with a small screwdriver from my desk. The metal scraped softly. Splinters snapped. The candle trembled, its light flickering violently. The board shifted. A thin gap opened. I froze, finger on the edge, waiting for what lay beneath. The candle spluttered as if in warning. Then the scent hit me, damp earth and decay. A low, rattling breath like air pulled through a broken reed. My skin crawled. Adrenaline clenched my limbs. I pulled back, grabbing the candle and holding it away as if its flame could shield me. For a moment, I considered screaming, but no sound came. Instead, the board slid further. A hand emerged, pale and slick, too long, with joints that clicked. Not human. Fingers bent at angles that made me wince. Its nails, thick, cavernous, raked lightly against the wood. It paused, giving me time to take in the twisted form. The skin looked stretched thin over bone. Veins snaked under a sickly hue, pulsing faintly as if alive. I wanted to close my eyes, but I couldn't. The thing wavered in the gap, testing the world above. I snatched the candle, backpedaling. Hot wax dribbled onto my wrist. I screamed, then launching back against the wall, limbs tangling. The candle clattered to the floor, snuffing its light. In the sudden blackness, the gap closed. The board clicked back in place, sealing off that world. My scream died, swallowed by dark. I stayed on the floor for hours, pressurized panic pushing tears out. I dared not breathe too loud. Every click of the old house became amplified. At last, I crawled to my bed and pulled the covers over my head, clutching them in a death grip. I drifted into fevered half-sleep. In the gray husk of dawn, I woke soaked with sweat. The bed was cold, no whisper of scratching. Light filtered through the curtains, neutral and calm. I sat up, mind racing. The floor beneath my fingers felt normal. No grooves, no give. I pressed my weight at the spot. Solid, entire, unbroken. My pulse thundered. Was it a dream? I convinced myself to rise. I turned on the bedside lamp. It hummed steady. The room looked empty. The floor, immaculate. I crept across it, testing each board until I reached the one I'd pried. I knelt, hands shaking, called up every logical explanation. Then I pushed it. The board tapped back, tapped once, tapping twice, beneath silence. No hand, no breath. In the faint light, the scratches feel like warnings etched into my mind. Every creak reminds me of unspoken vows drawn by unseen fingers. Sleep eludes me. Exhaustion claws at my vision. But I'll not rest until I pry that board free again. The house wears silence like a mask, but I hear the heartbeat beneath. It pulses in time with my own fear, a reminder that I'm not alone. I waited until the house drifted back into silence. Evening light bled through my curtains, pale and wan, but I resisted the urge to act until the world darkened completely. By midnight, every whisper of traffic had died. The trees outside stood still, their branches sifting moonlight across my walls. I lit a cluster of candles, their frail flames flaring and settling. Shadows danced, morphing into shapes I couldn't name. My pulse thrummed in my ears as I arranged them around the suspected board's small guardians against an ancient threat. The screwdriver hovered in my trembling grasp. I drew a ragged breath, recalling the feel of that thing's hand, a grotesque mimicry of human bone and flesh. The memory made my knuckles clench white, but I forced my fingers to relax. Logic demanded proof observation. I needed to see what lay below, to understand this thing that clawed at my sanity. I pressed the screwdriver's tip into the nail head, levering gently. The metal shrieked against wood. Splinters shattered, skittering across the floor like fleeing insects. One by one, I loosened the nails, each release echoing like a gunshot in my skull. The final plank gave a reluctant groan as it lifted. I tamped down my breath and pried it free, rolling it aside. Darkness yawned in the cavity beneath a void pregnant with secrets. I lifted my candle higher. The flame wavered the air, thick with the scent of damp rot. I saw something slimy clinging to the underside of the plank, blackened smears that glistened in candlelight. I set my jaw and leaned closer. There on the floor beneath lay shreds of grayish membrane, fibers that looked like dried sinew. I bit my lip against nausea and pressed forward, letting my fingers brush the remnants. The slime peeled away on my skin like cold tar. Below in the opening, I could see a narrow crawl space. Earth mixed with wood dust formed a coarse floor. The walls were lined with old joists, beam and bracket stained dark. My candle's light skated across them, revealing notches, faint grooves, gouged deep into the timber. I traced one with my fingertip. It felt sharp, recent. The grooves twisted into chaotic spirals, as though the creature beneath had etched runes of madness. A tremor ran up my spine. I shivered, sweat beading on my forehead. I leaned in further and saw the source of the notch's slender legs. Dozens of arthropod limbs twisted and jointed. Minute hairs caught the light like fine dust particles. They curled around the joist, retreating. I felt the stir of motion, the staccato clink of carapace on wood. Something recoiled deeper into unseen shadows. My heart pounded. Instinct screamed to retreat, but I was rooted. I needed to know. I shone my candle down the crawl space, its glow wavering across the void. A pair of eyes glinted, small, multifaceted. They blinked. In that instant, the limbs recoiled completely and the eyes vanished. The space collapsed into blackness. I swallowed. The crawling sound stopped. Silence pressed in again, heavier than before. Then, from somewhere below, a dull thump, like a fist pounding from the other side of a wall. My blood froze. I dropped the candle, and its flame splashed against the joist, nearly snuffing. I caught it heartsick. The floor trembled underfoot. The sound came again closer. 5, 6 pulses of dull impact. Waiting. Testing. I backed towards the wall, dragging the plank with me until I slammed it against my chest. My candlelight flickered. The forest of shadows beyond the board shimmered. I clutched the plank to my chest, like a shield breathing in ragged bursts. The thump ceased. Footsteps light shuffling moved across the floor above. My bed. Steps paused, then resumed skirting past. My breath stilled. Whoever or whatever was above had not found me yet. I leaned perilously close to the edge of the gap, peering again. The cavity seemed to sigh. My candlelight danced across a thin ribbon of silk, a web that connected joist to joist. Dew-like droplets glistened on the threads, sticky and cold. Spanning the width of the crawl space was a broken toy, a child's wooden horse, its neck shredded, splinters scattered across the earth. My stomach twisted. Memory clawed its way back. I moved into this house a year ago. No children lived here since the previous owners, a family of 4, left suddenly. Their daughter disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only that battered toy discovered in an upstairs closet. I slammed my hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. Candlelight flickered at the edges of the hole, making the silk web gleam like a trap. I imagined those pale hands reaching through, dragging me down, dragging me under. Goosebumps rippled across my skin. I fought the urge to flee to the hallway. I forced myself to observe. Drawing closer once more, I saw more details: footprints. Tiny muddy impressions on the earthen floor, leading deeper into darkness. Each print was no larger than a child's palm. They ended at a bend in the crawl space, where the joists disappeared into pitch black. The smell of decay grew stronger, there hotter, almost sulfuric. A low vibration hummed through the wood as though something large stirred beyond my sight. I realized then this was not just one creature. The evidence spoke of many hands, limbs, eyes. A nest of horrors living beneath my floorboards. Each movement above sent tremors through their domain. They listened, they watched, and with each day that passed, they grew bolder. I set the plank back over the opening, nailing it loosely in place. I didn't care if the nails bent. I just needed to seal that door. In doing so, I disturbed more dust. My candle sputtered. The last flicker revealed a dark stain pooling at the edge of the gap, thick and sticky, like spilled ink. It had not been there before. The stain pulsed as if something were just beneath the surface, alive. Fear clutched my chest. I stumbled backward, knocking over candles. Heartsick, I scrambled for the walls, sliding down, until my back hit the cold plaster. I shivered, sweat cold as ice. My mind reeled with images: the child's toy, the web, the prints. Each detail a link in a chain of nightmares. I sat there, shivering, until the candle flames guttered out one by one. Darkness fell, absolute and suffocating. The hush settled, punctuated only by my ragged breaths. I dared not move. The plastered walls seemed to press inward, as though the house itself were frightened, crouching alongside me. I don't know how long I sat in that void. Minutes, hours, time lost all meaning. The only certainty was that something stirred beneath my feet, restless. It plotted, it prepared, and sooner or later it would emerge. When I finally dared to move, the moon had set and the candles were spent. The darkness seemed thicker alive, with whispering shadows. My knees ached. I crawled to the bed and pulled the covers over me, but sleep refused me. Every creak of the house sounded like a summons. Every gust of wind against the windows was the sigh of hungry mouths. I woke hours later before dawn, pale and hollow-eyed. The gap was still secured, but I could feel the creature's presence through the wood, an itch at the nape of my neck, a susurrus just beneath my bones. And in that moment, I realized I had peeled back a lid on something older and vaster than a single crawling hand. A world that writhed with secrets and malice hidden in the dark earth beneath my home. The scratching began again, slower this time, a deliberate tap echoing through the floor. It was a summons. I pressed my ear against the boards, listening as the rhythms grew more intricate, an unholy language inviting me to come closer, to remove the board entirely, to descend into madness and dark wonders. I pulled away, tears wet on my cheeks. I don't know how much longer I can resist. But for now, I wait, waiting for the next midnight when I'll pry open that board again and peer into the hungry abyss. The scratching began as a whisper, but by the third night it had become a chorus. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, each breath measured against the slow beat of my heart. The moon had risen high, pale and indifferent, its cold light slicing through the curtains. I knew what was coming. I could feel it convulsing beneath me, gathering strength. I clutched the edge of the mattress nails, digging into fabric. When the first knock came sharp and insistent, I leapt up, candle in hand. Shadows trembled on the walls. I hurled myself toward the plank I'd sealed, hands fumbling at the nails. They were warped and bent from my last frantic attempt. With a curse caught in my throat, I tore them free, casting them aside. The board lifted with a groan that echoed like a death knell. 100 hands erupted through the gap, pale, slick-jointed limbs writhing like a nest of snakes. They clawed at the edges, scraping wood. My candle flickered and guttered. I stumbled backward, terror propelling me. They spilled into the room, crawling across the floor, in a living carpet of appendages reaching for me. Their nails clicked against hardwood, a symphony of despair. I backed away, knocking over the nearest furniture. The old oak desk thudded to the floor, scattering papers. The hands paused, as if savoring the disruption. Then they surged forward, quivering bodies spilling onto the rug. A low hiss rose from them, a sound like air escaping from countless lungs. My throat closed. I screamed and lunged for the bedroom door candle held high. The flame cast frantic light on 100 glinting nails. The hands surged closer, half hidden beneath a tangle of limbs. I crashed through the doorway, heart slamming against ribs. Behind me, the candle fell, snuffing its light. I sprinted down the dark hallway, feet slapping the floor, breath scorching my lungs. The house seemed alive corridors, stretching and contracting. Doors loomed like yawning maws. Their scratching followed me. 1,000 tiny claws scraped the wood behind me, gaining. I dove into the bathroom, slamming the door. The latch held, but I heard the door shudder as they struck it. I lit the overhead light and flicked the deadbolt. Its soft click did nothing to calm me. Shadows from the vanity mirror gleamed eerily. The air smelled of mildew and soap. I pressed my back against the cool tile, trying to collect myself. Through the door, the hands thumped and skittered. Then a sickening silence. I closed my eyes, tried to breathe, but a tapping began on the frosted window pane, slow and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. The world narrowed to that sound. Each tap dripped ice into my veins. I forced my eyes open, stepping closer. I saw nothing outside. The glass was opaque with condensation. Yet the taps continued moving left to right. Then a rasping breath like air through stone hissed behind me. I spun, heart leaping. There, slumped over the sink, was the wooden horse, the child's toy from the crawl space. Splinters glinted under the light. Its shattered neck oozed that black, sticky ichor. The toy's eyes, a child's innocence warped, seemed to gleam. I backed away, hand reaching for the door bolt. My fingers tremored. Behind me, the tapping stopped. The wooden horse fell with a heavy thud. I fled back into the hallway. The candlelight from the living room guttered weakly shadows, swallowing the walls. I grabbed the hall table, flinging lamps and picture frames as barricades. I spooned up a handful of salt from a dish of potpourri, scattering it across the thresholds. Old wives' trick, but I needed something. I whispered a prayer I didn't believe in. Then I heard it, 1,000 sighs dripping from the walls. The hands pushed through the salt, bending around it, as though it were water. They pooled beneath the table, rising, curling. The surface of the salt shifted under their weight, forming dark tracks. I realized with terror that nothing would stop them now. I bolted down the stairs 2 steps at a time. My candle flame jetted orange across the banister. The front door glowed at the end of the foyer, tantalizing promise of escape. I sprinted, lungs on fire. The heavy oak door was locked. My hands rattled the knob. I yanked it, but it didn't budge. Behind me, wood boards creaked. The crawl space beneath the floor still connected to the underside of the foyer. I spun around. The rug in the doorway began to quiver, hands pushing it up. Beneath dozens of wriggling limbs, unfurled onto the wooden threshold. They stretched toward me, reaching, grasping. I backed into a grand armchair, toppling it over. The seat cushioned my back. I clutched my candle as the hands crawled up the legs of the chair, inching toward me. I needed a weapon. My gaze landed on the fireplace poker, propped against the hearth. I gripped its cool metal. Stepping forward, I thrust it at the massive limbs. The poker clanged against nail and bone. One hand snapped into focus, a twisted, knuckled fist recoiling. I jabbed again, severing a limb. It twitched, black ichor dripping onto the hearth. The others recoiled momentarily, as if stunned. I pressed the advantage, driving the poker forward. Limbs detached, falling back into the writhing pile. My breath ragged, I realized I was driving them back. Each strike scattered more limbs. Soon the mass retreated, pooling back toward the crawl space. With a final echoing hiss, they vanished beneath the planks. I dropped the poker. Candlelight trembled across the floor. Silence flooded the room. I fled past the armchair to the front door again. Heart hammering, I tried the lock once more. It turned. The door swung open, letting in a blast of cold night air. The moonlight spilled across the carpet, pure and clean. I ran out onto the porch, collapsing against the railing. The forest beyond was still. No movement, no sound, just wind whispering through the pines. I looked back. The front door hung open. The house behind me seemed to breathe silent invitation, or threat, I couldn't tell which. I didn't stop to consider. I raced down the steps into the yard, stumbling over roses and stones. The cold air bit my lungs. I burst through the gate and didn't look back until I reached the gravel road. Only then did I slow to a walk, body shaking, tears blurring my vision. Safe? I wasn't sure. The house loomed behind me, dark and still. Yet, in the pitch of its windows, I thought I saw movement, a hand pressed against glass, pale and shining. I shook my head, blinking. When I looked again, the window was empty. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked away. With each step, the scratches became fainter, but I could still hear them echo in my mind, tiny taps, constant reminder of things that writhe. My candle burned out in the foyer, but the darkness beneath those floorboards still crawls, still waits. And I know it will come again. Before dawn, I will return. Not out of bravery, but because fear demands answers. I will pry that board free once more and face the abyss beneath my house. Because some horrors cannot be left alone. They must be stared at, and even then, they may stare back.